Encetem, doncs, la primera part d'aquesta jornada amb la ponència principal de la senyora Cecilia Malmström, excomissària europea de comerç, investigadora en el think tank basat a Washington, el Peterson Institute for International Economics. Aquest think tank és un dels més reconeguts en temes de comerç internacional i la senyora Malmström ha estat en els darrers mesos participant i moderant en moltes sessions que s'han organitzat des d'aquest think tank parlant de com la geopolítica afecta el comerç internacional. També ella ha estat membre del Parlament Europeu, comissària europea d'Interior entre el 2010 i 2014 i comissària europea de Comerç entre el 2014 i 2019, període en el qual va negociar acords de lliure comerç amb països com Canadà, Japó, Mèxic i també el fallit TTIP amb els Estats Units. Aquest increïble currículum la situa en una posició immillorable per donar-nos les claus per entendre l'evolució de les relacions comercials entre Europa i els Estats Units i l'impacte que tindran aquestes eleccions americanes en aspectes essencials com els aranzels, les polítiques tecnològiques, la indústria tecnològica o la relació amb la Xina. Cecilia, it's an absolute pleasure to having you with us today. Thank you for coming to Barcelona and for participating at our event. Please, the floor is yours.
Gràcies, bon dia. És un placer i un honor estar aquí amb vosaltres. Gràcies per convidar-me. And the rest will be in English. I do understand Catalan, so I think I understood almost everything you said. Deglobalization, reglobalization, decoupling, homeshoring, friendshoring, deshoring, de-risking, decoupling, strategic autonomy. All these have been words that have been circulating a lot in the debate globally on trade. And they all imply that something is happening. Globalization is changing. There is something new there. And they also imply that globalization as we knew it is dead. And is that true? It is not true, but it is true that very much is happening globally and that trade is changing. It did very well, surprisingly well, under the pandemic. There were a few initial hiccups, but the trade functioned. And you did very well, as has been shown today. What we see today is a kind of regionalization of trade. There is an element where you tend to trade more with your friends. The US is leaving from China, moving towards Mexico, Vietnam, India. And China is trading more with its regional partners in Asia. There is also an element of national security that has entered trade a couple of years ago, during Trump 1. Trade wars are good, and they're easy to win. That was what President Trump said the last time. He thought trade wars were good. So he imposed a lot of tariffs, motivated them from a national security point of view, which was quite unique. You might remember here in Spain that he imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium to us in Europe, but also to allies all over the world, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, Mexico, Turkey. And he did that motivating that imports to the United States of steel was a threat to national security. And that's quite odd to hear from someone that you're in NATO, you're your ally, and that we were a threat to national security. But we were, and he imposed those tariffs. He also imposed a lot of tariffs on Mexico and on others. And we, at that time, we had to retaliate, so we imposed counter tariffs. That was then. We also seen that China has used national security more. The most well-known example is that they imposed a tariff on Australian wine when Australia criticized their COVID policy, national security. They also banned trade with little tiny Lithuania because they wanted to open a kind of embassy for Taipei in Vilnius, national security. Geopolitics, obviously, has entered the scene as well. After Russia's terrible invasion of Ukraine, we saw how bad idea it was to be very dependent on Russian oil and gas. Not a good idea. And these experiences led, of course, to a lot of changing patterns, trading patterns in energy overall, and a wake-up call for many Europeans. Not only the terrible war and its civilian and military consequences, but also this economic dependency. Now we face a similar wake-up call, realizing that we are very dependent on something else. Nickel, lithium, magnesium, cobalt, copper, critical materials and metals that we need for the green transition, that we need in our telephones and the digital development. We need them in weapons. And 80% on average of all these metals are controlled, processed, or owned by China. This is not an ideal situation. So we need to diversify, and China knows this. They have already started to impose export restrictions on some of it: graphite, aluminium, magnesium, antimony. The EU has a Critical Materials Act that we are trying to strengthen our own extraction and processing of this, but that's not easy. We have a lot of these metals in Europe. We have a lot of them in my country, but they are deep down. It's tricky to get them out. There's a lot of licenses. There's a lot of economic impact assessment and environmental impact assessment. We have the indigenous population in Sweden and Finland, the Samis, and they don't want mines around the corner. Nobody wants mines. You saw there were huge protests also in Belgrade for the lithium mines to be expanded. So securitizing value chains is something that I think all of you who export are doing today. For geopolitics, and also what's happening in the Red Sea, for instance. The Houthi rebels in the Suez canals, many ships, most ships from Europe now have to take the detour via the Cape of Good Hopes. That takes 10 to 14 days extra, costs a lot of money, causes more greenhouse emissions, and is of course a security concern for many of the seamen. And to add to these changes, I would like to highlight the massive rise of subsidies and industrial policies that we see all over the world. We saw the ARA in the United States, Inflation Reduction Act, a formidable tool to accelerate the green transition, but it also contains subsidies that are discriminatory for us. We have the Net Zero Industry Act, which is also based on more industrial policy and subsidies. Now, subsidies are not necessarily a bad thing, but some of them can really hurt your neighbor if you don't do it carefully. And we would need a forum to discuss what is a good subsidy, what is a bad subsidy. And this also risks affecting the global south a lot, because they cannot subsidize as we can. But there is a new focus on the green transition that plays on into trade as well, in a good way, that we are trying to be more green in our trade, that there are much more trade in green technologies and so on. And there's a wave of different carbon pricing measures around the world. CBAM is the most known, the European one, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, but many countries have something similar. And that is excellent. It's a very good tool to fight emissions. But if we have different systems that are not compatible, it also leads to tensions. And that is something that we see popping up today. So with all this happening, and the cruel world with wars, etc., we would need global cooperation. But, as you said, multilateralism is not very much à la mode today. The international institutions are weaker than ever. Right now, as we speak, there is this COP meeting in Baku. It's not going well. United Nations is weak. WTO is weak. So this is probably. So yes, all this affects globalization. And where it will end and where we will land is a little bit difficult to see. So when we talked to Christina about the title of this, Transatlantic Tensions in Times of Trouble, it's not only a nice alliteration, but is also illustrating what we see today. Transatlantic relations are strong, fundamentally. After the Second World War, Europe and US worked together to build up international institutions. NATO, United Nations, Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank and IMF, and later GATT that became WTO. There was a joint interest to establish some global rules for all of us to benefit from. And of course, the US was instrumental in creating a global system characterized by openness, international rules, and norms. The Marshall Plan helped Europe get back together again. Jumping further, after the Berlin Wall, when it fell, was a unique time of democratization, of peak globalization, of good transatlantic relations, and strong multilateral fora at that time. That was then. Today, we witness, as I said, growing protectionism, global erosion of democracy, the cruel invasion of Ukraine, a terrible war going on in the Middle East, increasing isolationism, and the weakening of internationalism. These are the challenges we need to confront. But we cannot deny the fact that European Union and the US are trading more than $1 trillion of good every year. $3.6 billion every day, and you contribute to that. More than 16 million jobs are directly implied by the transatlantic economy. Now, I don't think, maybe you didn't notice, but there was an election over there some weeks ago, and that will change things. Donald Trump did much better than all the opinion polls expected. He is now dominating not only his own party, but also both chambers in the Congress and in the Supreme Court as well. Strong majorities, very few, if any, guardrails. He can basically do what he wants, and he will do what he said he would do. He will keep his promises. For domestic audience, these are tax cuts, massive deportation of non-documented migrants. That will cause a lot of problems for the labor market in the US. And he will also start drilling. Drill, baby, drill. There will be much more cheap oil on the international markets. That's not really ideal for the green transition. For us in Europe and for many others in the world, it will mean tariffs. Tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary, he said. You can have different opinions about that, but he likes tariffs. And he thinks it is an injustice that we buy less from US than they buy from us. You could think that is a consumer choice, but anyway. So he will impose tariffs. He has said that he will impose tariffs of between 10 and 20% all across the board on all goods. Not on services, because that's much more, it's not possible, but on goods. And we have to prepare for this. I think he will do it. He did it last time, he will do it. Will he do it all at the same time? Probably not. Will he phase in? Will he target Spain, Germany, and France? Maybe. We don't know, but it will happen. And I think this is one of the earliest decisions he will take. So we need to prepare. We need to also prepare that he will impose 60% or more on China. And how will that deter global trade? Some of it could actually be positive for us, because there will be new possibilities to buy cheaper from China, but it could also affect our markets with more competition. We don't really know that, but we need to prepare. So what shall we do? Well, we need to prepare. Retaliatory tariffs? Maybe. At least make a list before and say, okay, you do this is what we could do. We might not do it, but we could do. And then he would try to find a deal. He wants to make a deal, like always. What could be in the deal? Well, maybe we can buy more natural gas from the US. Maybe we can find some cooperation on China. Maybe we can look at what we do with cars. Maybe we can lower the car tariffs. But what if he puts Ukrainian weapons on the agenda as well? What if he says that my pal, my friend, my best friend, Elon Musk, he doesn't like the digital act that you have in the European Union. You have to give him exceptions. He could very well do that. And that, of course, we can't do. So we will have to indicate that we are ready to fight back, but that we are also ready to do a deal. There is a Trade and Technology Council created with the US. It hasn't led to a lot of things, but it's a platform to discuss on high level, but also on technical level. I'm doubtful whether it will survive, at least on political level, but on the technical level, there's a lot of cooperation. And probably you have your contacts in the US with companies, there are universities, there are NGOs, there are cities, there are states with whom we can continue to cooperate and who will want to preserve the ties that are there. With China, Alicia will talk about this later, we could probably find some common policy, tougher on investment screening, on export restrictions, on dual-use materials that they are then exporting to Russia, who use them in the war. Something might be able to be done there. But of course, we need a China strategy on our own as well. We are dependent on China, so we need to find a balance while being tough on China and pushing for them to respect international rules, but also trading with them on all the non-vulnerable goods, and also knowing that they have probably the best green technology in the world. So the Commission, hopefully, you know, there are some political games going on in Brussels right now. I hope that they will this week vote on the Commission in the European Parliament and that the Commission can enter into, start working the 1st of December. We need strong leadership in Europe right now, and the leadership is weak in many other countries as well, Germany, France, etc. So hopefully the new Commission will start working. There's a new President of the European Council, Antonio Costa. There is a new Parliament, and there will be a new Commission. The Commissioner responsible for trade, Mario Šefčovič, has been there for a long time. He is experienced. He will be Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security. That's his title, which is new. And that could indicate that the Commission and Ursula von der Leyen sees trade as more transactional than before. We have, of course, to see what we can do with relations with the US, but we have so many other partners as well. We have trade agreements with a lot of countries. We should use them. We should make sure also that the ongoing negotiations with Mexico, it's almost done. With Australia, it's almost done. With a little bit of effort, we can conclude it. We could advance with India, with Indonesia. We have an agreement that is done with Mercosur. I was involved in trying to conclude that. It's stuck because of France, to be honest. But most of the other countries, I would say almost all of the others, want to sign it. 5 years ago, when we concluded that agreement, and you know that, you have excellent contacts, of course, with the Latin American continent, Europe was the most important trading partner with the 4 Mercosur countries. Today, it's China. China is building a huge port in Peru, which will be the hub for trade with them. They trade more with China, then we are on second place, and then US, depending a little bit between the countries. So we need to sign that agreement, hopefully very soon. I think Europe should also join the big international trade agreement that exists in the Indo-Pacific, CPTPP, with 12 countries. The UK just joined. Our allies and friends are there. It would be a good place to try to improve relations. We must try to see what we can do in WTO. It is weak, but we need it. We can work with a lot of other countries, not with the US right now, but with others to see if we can create agreements with a coalition of the willing. 85% of global trade is still happening within WTO rules. And we need WTO to try to speed up some agreements. If not everybody wants to be on board, let's do it with those who want to. On subsidies, on carbon emissions, there could be a lot that could be done there. And we, independently, who sits in the White House, we need to do our own homework. 90% of global growth is happening outside Europe. And if you look at the statistics, you know it, we're not doing as well as the US and China when it comes to growth, investments, innovation, patents, all that. We have hard work to do. The new Bible in Brussels is the Draghi report. You probably read it. There's a short summary of 65 pages. The longer report is almost 400 pages. And it contains a lot of really good proposals. Some less good, but many very good. And proposals that we promised each other in Europe to do 20 years ago. And we still haven't done it. The best thing we have in the European Union, economically wise, is the internal market. And that's a jewel, but there's still so many bureaucratic obstacles. It's still not functioning well. And with some technical changes and political will, we can arrange this. And that will improve a lot on innovation and on intra-EU trade. And it will attract more countries to our market as well. So we need to work on the Draghi report. Every commissioner has been given the task, think Draghi, think simplification. And I think this is going to be very important for the new incoming commission. And also trying to find out how innovation and growth can be combined with sustainability and the green transition. We need to find the way there. As you know, there's a growing resistance to the green agenda, which is problematic. I mean, it's urgent. It's a matter of survival of the planet. But the Commission has promised that within the first 100 days, there will be a new updated version of the new Clean Industrial Deal, it's called. It's the version 2.2. So we have a lot to do. It's going to be tough the coming years. It wasn't all that easy under Biden, but at least we had a very good and open dialogue. The cooperation went very well on Ukraine. There was protectionism, there was the signs of increased isolationism, but at least we had an open dialogue. Now we have to wait to see what President Trump will do, and we have to be ready to respond to that, obviously. But there are ties that keeps us together, independently of Trump, on different levels. So let's exploit them. And the most important ties where we both sides of the Atlantic need to cooperate is trade and is exports, imports. We know that. That gives jobs to ordinary people on both sides. That gives growth. That keeps us together. We have to do our own homework on competitiveness, on green transition. We need to prepare for enlargement and need to do a lot of other reforms. We need to see how we can find a budget for this, for defense. We need to make sure that we have a budget that is adapted for the needs that we have in the future. And the leadership right now is a bit wobbly, but that is our problem. If you look into the past, it's easy to be a bit depressed with what's happening in the world today. That's true. But if you look in the past of the European Union, external challenges has always brought us together, and we become stronger. That has been true for the Euro crisis. Look now, Greece is one of the strongest economies of Europe. It has been true for the Brexit crisis. It hasn't been good for the UK, hasn't been really good for us, but we came out stronger and we were not divided on this. We had the migration crisis, we had the COVID crisis, a bit chaotic in the beginning, but Europe came together and we worked together. On Ukraine, the first day we came together, started to working on sanctions and on support. So every time there has been one of these big threats or challenges, we have come together and we have come stronger out of this. And today there are lots of challenges, no way denying it. But maybe this could be something that really forces us to, okay, let's stop the silly fighting. Of course, we have different opinions in a democracy, but the silly fighting, let's come together, let's do what we have to do, let's focus on the European economy, let's try to expand our network of friends all over the world, let's see what we can work with within the transatlantic relations, and let's hope that there will be new possibilities as was mentioned before of this cooperation. I think we can do it, and we can do it with your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Malmström. No volíem deixar perdre aquesta ocasió de tenir-la aquí avui perquè vosaltres, al públic, li poguéssiu fer arribar les vostres preguntes. Per això en els fulls d'inscripció, els formularis d'inscripció i a les xarxes socials us hem demanat preguntes, que n'hem rebut moltes, gràcies, i ara tenim temps per fer-ne 3 o potser 4, i per tant li farem les 3 més votades, que les veurem aquí en pantalla. We'll do a brief Q&A.
Sure.
And it's the 3 most voted questions by the audience that we've received. Let's see if we can see the first one. Molt bé, perfecte. How can the EU protect its trade policy if faced with an escalation of tariffs by the United States?
Well, that is the big question, because it will happen. They know he talks a lot, he will not do it, he will. But we don't really know what. So what we should do is to prepare for the worst, but also be prepared for the best if it's up. So I think we should prepare a list of retaliatory tariffs. If you do it, we will do it. But it has to be measured, it has to be very balanced, it has to be W compliant, because we don't want a global trade war. But I think we need to show that we are ready to do it, because then some people will say, this will cost a lot of money for European and for American citizens. But we should also signalize that we are ready to talk, to make a deal, to see what can happen. And for that, we need to be united. We need to discuss that strategy as soon as the new Commission is on board. And then we also need to reach out to the rest of the world. The whole world will be affected by tariffs. And so we can come together and say, we don't think trade wars are good. We want to continue trading. We should do these more trade agreements with each other. We should exploit those who are there. We should absolutely make sure we can increase trade with Latin America and with the Indo-Pacific. We have lots of possibilities and unexplored territory there where we can trade. And then we should, with those who want, make sure that WTO doesn't fall apart. So a multi-strategy, I think. But the problem is that we don't really know. So we have to prepare for different scenarios. But you, as individual companies, I think you should keep on trading, keep those good relationships that you already have with companies in the US and elsewhere as well, and try to continue that independently of what happens, of course.
Mm-hmm. In the long term, is a free trade agreement with the EU and the US possible? You were trying to work on that, in fact, a few years back. Do you think it is possible with this Trump administration?
Well, it is strange that Europe has trade agreements with almost all of the world, but not with our most important trading partner. And that is what we tried to change with the TTIP negotiations. They were difficult, and we didn't achieve them with Obama. There were problems as well. And then they were put in through the freezer with Trump 1, and they're still in the freezer. They're behind the Ben & Jerry ice cream far. I don't think we can take it out under Trump. One day, yes. But on a short-term basis, I don't see us having a trade agreement with the US, no, unfortunately.
So trade war more than trade agreement, probably in the next few years to come.
Hopefully, yeah.
We'll talk a bit later on strategies that companies can pursue to try to bypass these trade wars. And the other elephant in the room, China. How will the EU handle US pressure to be tougher on China, which definitely, it will definitely be like that, probably. Yeah.
Well, there as well, you will need to work with different scenarios. I hope the new Commission will very soon start working on a new updated China strategy, where we combine. We need to be tough because they're not following the rules and they're not respecting the level playing field, but we also need to trade with China with all these problems. So finding a balance there is going to be tricky. I hope Alicia will answer this question.
Yes.
So that is going to be easy. And we also need to think in two or three steps, because if they are basically banned from the American market, and the Chinese economy is very export dependent, and it's not doing very well right now. They will seek new markets, and there is a risk of dumping things into the European market, which can be problematic. Could be good in some ways, but it could also be problematic. So we need to find a very tricky balance between being open and willing to work with them, but also making sure that there are certain rules that needs to be respected. And I think, seeing how the hearings went in the European Parliament, many commissioners are tougher on China than before. So we will have a tougher China policy. Maybe that's an area where in some areas we can work with the US on that. But we can't cut ties with China totally. It's not possible.
Mm-hmm. Great.
But Alicia will tell you this,
yes,
I hope.
Now we'll hear more about China. Before you go, because you were really quick, brief and to the point, so thank you for such brief answers. Regarding the CBAM, and you mentioned it, so what do you think? Different mechanisms, will it help decarbonization? Will it achieve its goals if there's so many different mechanisms? Will the EU try to agree with the US or with China on that?
Well, pricing carbon is the most intelligent way to achieve net zero. It's not the only way, but it's one. But I think economists all over the world agree that pricing carbon in one way or another, it's the good thing to do. So CBAM is right in its thought and in its ambition. But of course, there are 75 different versions of pricing carbon in the world today. ETS system, emission trading systems, or taxing in different ways. And they all want to achieve the same thing. And if that clashes and we get a big conflict, it won't achieve its goal. So I hope that EU, as we are now implementing it gradually, phasing it in, that it will be a bit modest as well and listen to the concerns, especially from the Global South, because they want to do it, but they can't. They don't have the means to set up a clean production and to elaborate all these methodology that quickly. So we need to help them doing that. And I think we need to be agreeing with other countries that your way is also good. But in order to do that, there's one thing that needs to be done. We need to have a global way to measure emissions. We don't. We measure it in different ways in different countries. And how can you then say that is good? So we need to agree on a common methodology, and then maybe we can recognize each other's mechanism. The EU one is the most ambitious. It has led to the whole world, or many countries of the world, trying to do something similar. This is good, but we must make sure that the good doesn't become the enemy. The bad doesn't become the enemy of the good, so that we are a bit more flexible when we impose it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for your very excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.